All righty then. Here we are, Nate and Jen.
Hello.
Once again, we are live. Well, we're live in the studio. This will be recorded, of course. But this is Life Matters with Nate and Jen, episode number 4, if you can believe it. And we have an interesting topic for discussion tonight and for sharing. This is called Leave and Cleave. And I guess I've always been partial to the King James version of Genesis 2:24, where the man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. So that is what we're going to be talking about tonight in this episode. We're going to share just a few thoughts. We don't want to make this too long, but we want to share some thoughts about leaving and cleaving. I'm going to read the scripture for you first.
Genesis. What does leave and cleave mean? We don't even use those words usually.
Yeah, what does that
Unless
even
you're
mean?
A preacher or something.
Yeah, those old stodgy preachers. But Genesis 2:24 is the impetus, the scriptural impetus for this discussion. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. So, as Jennifer mentioned, what's the the biggest question here is, what does it mean to leave and cleave? Most people, that makes no sense. Like, okay, yeah, I've heard that before somewhere. Some boring preacher said that in a sermon once. But we're going to take turns here and divvy up the spoils of this lesson here. We're going to get right into it. So to leave, some possible definitions here are to loosen, to relinquish, to leave, of course, and is translated leave or leaves in all of the major translations, not just the newer manuscript ones, but the King James as well. And the meaning is really to leave being under your parents' roof, rule, authority, and it has to do with establishing one's own path, and establishing one's own household unit. Now, I think probably back in the day, in what we typically call the Old Testament, back in the day, most men who would leave their family when they left their immediate parents and they cleaved unto their wife, most of them probably had a very similar, if not the same exact trade that their father had. That was very common. Now, in today's culture, obviously, it could be very different. So, leaving and cleaving in today's culture may have some variations here, but establishing one's own path as an adult, establishing one's own household, family unit, however you want to describe that. So that's what I think. Leaving is probably the more obvious one. Like, we all understand what it means to leave. And some, let's face it, most of us, we're in our middle 40s now, but when we were teenagers, we couldn't wait to leave and cleave. Mostly we couldn't wait to just leave, and get out of our parents' household because of all their stupid rules and everything else. But okay, so that's leave. So Jennifer is going to cover cleave for us here.
Sure. So the definition of cleave has to do with to cling to or adhere to, fasten together, or be joined. And so in the Bible, it's translated as cleaved or joined, united, or hold fast. And so this really has to do with the two becoming one. So the married couple cleaving to each other. So that means a lot of different things. That has to do with intimacy in the flesh. It also has to do with being united in a life focus. So they're that unified goal of how they're going to live their lives together. It has to do with establishing family dynamics, which we're going to talk some more about. So what is their household going to look like, and any kiddos that come along, and what is their, like for us, what does the Wolf household look like?
Yeah.
And then also has to do with a priority shift, and the responsibility goes to their own household as well.
Yeah, I think that's super important to distinguish too. I think when you mention intimacy of the flesh, obviously that's part of the marriage bond and the male and female coming together, becoming one flesh. I think a lot of people, if we're all just being honest, right? When we're younger and we're wanting to get married, I mean, the hormones are raging, whatever you want to call it, and a lot of people focus on that part, right? The intimacy, and so a
Sure.
lot of people are looking for someone in a marriage that really just blows their socks off. Man, they're just a knockout, and they get my motor running, and it's like I just can't wait to be united in one flesh with this person. And obviously, that's a part of marriage, right? But sometimes I think people make that the main thing, especially in our society. I don't know,
Mhm.
Jennifer, what do you think about that? But in our culture, isn't that the big thing? Like,
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
all about sex,
Mhm.
right? I mean, let's be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, and we've even talked to our kids about, I mean, they're at an age where they think the opposite sex is attractive. And our older boys are, graduated from high school. And, we talk to them about not just choosing a boyfriend or a girlfriend for them
Mm,
that's attractive. Of course, that's important and a big, focus for them, but also somebody who has the same priorities and who's going to complement them, because looks fade. I mean, someone could be disfigured in an
mm,
accident or something horrible, but does that mean that your commitment to that person goes away? And so it's a lot more than just the looks and just the
yeah,
attraction physically. It's also, does this person meet your is the are they a helpmeet for you?
yeah. Yeah, I think that's important. And, as Jennifer said, being unified in life, I mean, that's huge because, Jennifer and I have been married for 27 years and we are still attracted to each other.
Yeah.
However, uh, I think we probably could both say, especially after this year, if our relationship was just about, the good looks, after all we've been through this year, if we didn't have the same life focuses, obviously you're talking to believers, right? To followers of the Messiah.
Yeah.
So the faith aspect of that was the hugest part.
Hmm.
But well, you really need to have both. I mean, you shouldn't have one without the other. You shouldn't be with someone that you're not attracted to, right? That you don't want to be intimate with. And you shouldn't be with somebody that, at least on the major important things, you're not unified.
Right.
And certainly, Jennifer and I would both agree that there are things that we differ on, and opinions, and styles and whatnot. But on the major ones, right, the things that really matter and can either bless or strain a marriage or put pressure on a family dynamic, we're the same. Or at least we're agreeing to be the same together. We give a little sometimes, but yeah, those family dynamics are tough, and important at the same time. So okay, yeah, and on this shift of responsibility, we're not saying we want folks to understand. We're not saying that the leave means you ditch your family. It's like
Right.
I'm done
No.
with you. Thanks for all you've done for me.
Hmm.
No, it just means that the priority shifts. I mean, my responsibility. When I leave and cleave unto my wife and we start our own household, my immediate responsibility, of course, is God the Father, the creator. But immediately, as far as the earthly people, is my wife and my family. And doesn't mean I neglect my parents, whose household I left, but it does mean that there has to be a proper balance.
Right.
um, and so we have two statements here in our notes. One, in the positive, blessings occur when both parties leave and cleave properly. I guess there's no perfect way to do that, other than if you just followed the word of God perfectly. But let's face it, we don't do that. But there's a proper way, a better way to leave your family and to cleave unto your spouse, and that is a way of blessing. And it really has to do with following the word of the Father. And what's the second one, Jennifer?
Well, the second one is that problems can arise when one or both parties do not leave and cleave properly. So
Yeah.
if the husband or the wife or both struggle with that, or there's some barriers to that happening.
Yeah, and I think we probably all can, think of some couple or couples that we know that, are examples of both of those, someone who has done a good transition and someone who has done a bad one. And I guess one example could be, if whether it's the male or the female, okay, the husband or the wife, there's nothing wrong with I'll just use the wife as example, if that's okay, because we know that a lot of times, the wives are still very close, to their parents. Sometimes the husbands can
Mhm.
be too, of course. But in the example that I was thinking of, you have a wife who is very, she's beyond just close, remaining close with her family, but she's just very clingy with her family. It's like mentally, emotionally, she's never left their household. She's never purpose to establish her own. In that situation, it can cause a strain on the marriage,
Sure.
and vice versa. Some guys, hey, I'm a mama's boy, right? So I'm still very close with my mama. But if I mentally and emotionally did not leave her household and cleave into my wife and be purposing to establish our home together primarily, that's going to undermine some things in our relationship. And so we could go on and on and on about examples with that, but I think you guys know exactly what we're talking about. But just suffice it to say, um, that it doesn't mean when you leave your household, your parents' household, or your guardian, whoever you were with, it doesn't mean that you now have a lack of cooperation with them,
Mhm.
or a lack of fellowship, or somehow your attitude changes toward them. You can still have a close relationship, as long as they're respecting the boundaries of your new household. And we
Mhm.
kind of covered boundaries
Right.
already in the last
Mhm.
video, so we won't belabor that. But it just, cleaving describes um, a reasonable sense of autonomy in your household.
Mhm.
It's not
Yeah.
your parents or your in-laws running the show. The father is running the show, and you're following Jesus. Yahusha, the Messiah. He's the ultimate head and authority. But we do have to have reasonable boundaries with our parents and extended family, and we already talked about that. So let's go to our last few points here, Jennifer.
Yeah. So we were thinking about, family dynamics are almost like on a spectrum. So you've got maybe on one extreme, you've got families that are not very close. Everybody kind of does their own thing. On the other extreme, you might have like an enmeshed family system where um, everyone in the family can barely breathe or make a decision without getting everyone else's input. And really, that's not fostering independence and autonomy. So, but maybe a family of origin might range on one side or the other. So, um, finding a balance. Nate and I come from not opposite families, but
Different, pretty
his
different.
family of origin was maybe on one, a little more on one side than the other, and mine was on the other. And
We're not
so,
gonna. We'll tell you what those dynamics were. We're not going to tell you which family was this one and which one was that one.
yeah,
Maybe you can try to take a guess. I mean, you got a 50-50 chance,
right.
but
So when we were married and we our first few years of marriage, we were around our families a lot before we started kind of moving away with different jobs that Nate had. But we had to kind of come to our own balance as
mm,
a couple. And then as we had children, we had to make some decisions about how we were going to spend our family time, just as the two of us versus with his family or my family. Um, Holidays
mm,
were a big source of, decision making. How are we
mm.
going to, whose house are we going to spend time with? And how are we going to divvy that up? And are we going to kind of take a stand that we're going to have our own time at our house, whatever that was?
Yeah, establishing our own traditions.
Yep.
And obviously, if you have kids, and especially younger kids, that's even more challenging because the grandparents want to see their grandkids. Unless your kids are brats, they want to see them all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so there is some fine tuning. And in my
Yeah.
situation, my parents divorced when I was 3.5, 4 years old.
Right.
But when Jennifer and I got married, all of our sets of families were in Anchorage, Alaska. So could you
Hmm.
imagine? And we don't keep most of the we don't keep the secular holidays anymore. That's a whole nother story. We've transitioned out of that and into the feasts of the Father. His Moed, his Moedim.
Yeah.
However,
But at the time, we hopped around from house to house
yeah,
between three sets of parents and then our own home. And it was,
Exhausting.
exhausting, and we
Yeah.
had to talk that out and, kind of tweak things as they went along.
Yeah.
Another thing that we've had to find a balance on is parenting and discipline methods, because that looked different in each of our
Mm.
households, and we needed to discuss and come to a decision on what we were going to practice, how we were going to try to set discipline for our children.
Yeah.
And then religious beliefs,
Mm.
sometimes you and your partner spouse may come from parents, two sets of parents who are very different religiously. So that can be a situation where, as a united couple, you need to decide, how you're going to practice your faith. And
Absolutely.
but that can be a source of frustration with extended family at times.
Yeah. I mean, in this day and age too, families can be so different on almost opposite ends of a spectrum. And, in our situation, one of our families was more independent. And and with that independence, kind of autonomous,
Mhm.
they loved each other, just as much as the other spouse's family loved their kid. But it was just more like a free flowing. Sometimes we did have dinners together and whatnot, but it seemed like some on that spectrum, it was the family was, what would you say, more like everybody was kind of doing their own thing most of
Yeah,
the time.
yeah.
And then on the other
Mhm.
side was what, Jen?
Well, I think the other family, there was just an expectation that anytime we could possibly be together, that we would be together.
Yeah.
And so, coming to um, an agreement or compromise between those kind of two extremes was something that Nate and I just had to work
Yeah.
through. And sometimes it was a compromise, and then sometimes, it was just kind of coming to our
Yeah.
own decision as a couple. This is the way Nate and Jen Wolf are going to be.
And we're not going to sit here and tell you that, oh, that transition was just so smooth because Nate and Jen did it perfectly. No, we were young at the time. I mean, been married a handful of years. We just got back from college, and
Mhm.
less than 2 years later, we've got our first kid. And, and then every 2 years, we've got another kid. So it was a wild ride, but we navigated that. We tried to be as fair as we could. We didn't want to be unfair to anyone,
Mhm.
but there was some jockeying for position, and there was a
Yeah.
little frustration from some of the parents when we made that adjustment, because we had to try to balance some things. And if you think about it, in our situation, one set of parents was probably fine seeing us once in a while, and the other ones kind of felt like they were getting gypped.
Yeah.
But it just goes to everyone's own paradigm and what they were used to. But
Mhm.
eventually, everything balanced out. And
Yeah.
I will say this too. I mean, we're not complaining. We were blessed to have all the parents living in the same town.
Mhm.
That was a blessing. I mean, within 12 minutes of any of the three.
Yeah.
However, it was also very challenging, when you're
Mhm.
looking at extended families, when you're looking at, blended families and families with divorce. I mean, that did complicate things. So
Sure.
you do have to be careful. And you know what? No matter what you do, somebody's feelings are going to get hurt.
Mhm.
Just it's how you communicate that, and be honest and upfront and transparent, and say, hey, we're trying to be fair, as fair as we can with everyone, and still also have our own family time and traditions.
Yeah. I wanted to
So
add to that too. I think, when Nate and I were on the same page about it, that helped, because if Nate felt strongly that we should do this certain way, and I was kind of
mm,
begrudgingly going along, then my parents might feel like, oh, Nate's changing
Nate's the
everything,
problem.
or vice versa. So
Yeah.
being on the same page, again, we didn't do that perfectly. It was also, kind of a process, because when we first got married, it was just the two of us. Then we had, our
Yeah,
first
for
son.
for 4 years in college, four and a
And
half years, it was just us.
right. And after our first son, one baby's a little easier to carry around and cart around to houses and whatever. And then as we started having a larger family,
Yeah. You
um,
got two or
we
three,
had to change. We decided, for ease of our sanity and not making cranky babies,
yeah,
making the babies cranky, having to
yeah,
cart them around to different houses. That was just kind of one of the factors that made us
Yeah.
decide, hey, let's kind of narrow this down, and maybe we will be spending a little more time at our own home
Yeah.
and asking the grandparents to come visit us, for example.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes the dynamic is, hey, yeah, we'd be happy. It'd be great for you to see them again tonight. But it would be easier is if you guys could come over to our place.
Yeah.
And growing up in Alaska, and I know some people can relate to any place that has substantial winters, cold, dark, long winters.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point, for a couple of years, we had, three car seats going on in our car. Sometimes we had one in
Hmm.
an infant seat and one in a baby, regular car seat, and then we had one in the,
Booster.
the booster seat,
Hmm.
the 5 or 6 year old that,
Yep.
legally still had to be in a booster seat. And so, could you imagine dragging your kids, 3, 4 times a night to someone's house in the dead of winter, and you got the kids screaming. So you got to try to do what you can with what you have, and
Right.
and be reasonable.
And even
Um,
if you don't have kids, it's still this is still an important
Good point.
topic, because
Yeah.
just between the two of you as husband and wife, you're going to have to make those decisions about how you're going to run your household. Um, a lot of our situations had to do with the children and how spending time with different sets of parents, but all those other factors that we talked about were important and
Yeah.
big discussions that we had to have.
For sure. And so, when you're establishing a new family, the two becoming one, the leaving and the cleaving, it's going to involve a mixture of maybe all of these things.
Hmm.
Some things from one set of parents, something from the other household, and then maybe some new things that you want to try, or maybe there's some things from both parents' households that you say, you know what, we don't really like that. We're going to do that a little different.
Yeah.
So, and some family traditions may even cease. And probably
Hmm.
one of the most difficult ones, and that could be a whole topic in and of itself, is especially with a lot of folks in the quote truther community, or spiritual focuses there, and we're saying, hey, we're not going to participate in the pagan, the holidays that have the pagan foundations. And most of the secular holidays, although some of them they'll say are religious, they're really still very secular when you break them down. And so that you got to talk about that too, because
Hmm.
how do you handle the grandparents and the extended family? You have to be very careful and patient and gentle in your communication, and make it about your personal conviction, and not about, it's
Hmm.
not about people, it's not about personalities, it's just, hey,
Right.
we really feel strongly about this, and we would ask that you would please honor that with us. And feel free to have discussion. Don't just say, here's our decision, end of story.
Hmm.
Say, we're happy to discuss it with you so you can understand, uh, why we've made these decisions, where we're coming from, and how we can
Right.
work together. Say, hey, we're all on the same team here. We just are trying to do what's best, and we're trying to stick to our spiritual convictions from the
Hmm.
word. So, okay. All right. Well, we're just about here to the end. We've gone on for a little over 20 minutes. Uh, so, leaving and cleaving, we started with the scripture, Genesis 2:24. It is the Father's design, and it is the family is the foundation of all society. So, this is a hugely important subject that we're talking about. And we need to do our best to try to handle this, appropriately and
Hmm.
according to the word. But just remember, this is, why does God give us this design? I mean, it's for a blessing.
Hmm. Yeah.
He doesn't design this so we can have hassle and trouble and
Hmm.
problems with the in-laws and the outlaws and our parents. And no, this is by design. It's to be a blessing. And so keep that in mind. Help it to be a blessing. And it's not intended to cause conflict or to separate people fully. Yeah, sometimes the apron strings need to be cut a little bit, but we're not looking to attack the family unit. We're looking to build it up, right? And one important scripture as we finish, Malachi chapter 2 verse 15. A lot of times we say, okay, Malachi 2 is the God hates divorce, hates covenant breaking chapter, which is true. It says that there, but Malachi 2:15, one of the main points is that why does the Father, um, why does Yahuwah want these things to be the case? Well, because he's seeking a godly offspring. He's seeking
Hmm.
a righteous offspring. That's the whole point. Yeah, he wants us to be fruitful and multiply, but he wants us to seek him, to know him, to raise up our children in his commandments and in his, in his ways, the ways of blessing. And let's not forget that Elohim made us in his image.
Right.
So, I mean, how important is that? So I hope that we hope that this has been a informative and maybe a little challenging, but challenging in a good way. Jennifer, any last thoughts you want to throw in here?
Nope. I
Okay.
think we got it.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much again for watching Life Matters with Nate and Jen. This is episode 4, Leave and Cleave. Give us your feedback in the comments. Feel free to email us at nate@firedfortruth.org. If you have comments, if you have suggestions for important potential future episodes, we have had several suggestions so far. We're
let us know
keeping,
what you want us to talk about next.
yeah, and we are keeping a list, and we don't guarantee that we'll cover every topic that's suggested, but we'll definitely pull from that list.
Definitely.
So thank you guys so much from the Life Matters Fired for Truth Studios. I'm Nate, and this is Jen, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Take care and God bless.